Have you ever thought, is this just me when struggling to stay organized, start tasks, or manage time? For those of us over 50, these challenges might not be just aging. They could be ADHD hiding in plain sight for decades. I'm Jami Shapiro, host of Grandma Has ADHD, and I'm building a community where your experiences matter. Whether you're diagnosed, questioning, or simply curious, you're not alone. Our Facebook group is filled with vibrant, understanding people over 50 who share their stories, strategies, and yes, even their struggles, with plenty of laughter along the way. Ready to find your people? Join our growing Grandma Has ADHD Facebook community. Please like and subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen and share it with someone who might need to hear they're not alone, because ADHD doesn't have an age limit and neither does understanding yourself better. Together, we're changing the conversation about ADHD after 50. Come be part of the story. Hi, and welcome to the latest edition of Grandma Has ADHD. I am really excited to bring our next guest into the conversation. Julie Potiker is actually somebody who I've met personally. We are in the same community, and I got to be in a mindfulness exercise that Julie did at a retreat that I was at. And I remember thinking, wow, this content is amazing. And people with ADHD who have this negative self-talk going on, this constant dialogue, really would benefit from this. And then, Julie, I think you know that I ran across a podcast interview of an interview that you did with one of my favorite podcasters. And then I reached out and I said, Julie, I have to have you on my podcast. But Julie's going to introduce herself, but I'm going to share a little bit about Julie. So she actually is and has extensive certifications, and she is a teacher and training on a variety of tools. I am stumbling and methods.
Right.
And
not a teacher in training.
I'm a teacher and trainer. You know what? I'm going to let you read it. I love that. And you know what? One of the things that I love about my ADHD and my being really open about it is that I don't need to mask it. I just own it. And I'm asking you for help because this is something that I'm butchering.
Actually, if I don't know my own bio, there's a problem there.
True.
So I'm a certified mindful self-compassion teacher. I'm certified through the UCSD Center for Mindfulness. I'm also on the teaching team there.
Thank you.
Throughout the past 10 years, I've taken all sorts of trainings and gotten different certifications, and I've folded them all in and synthesized them. So that's why it's like a variety of blah, 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 blah. Basically, I'm a mindful self-compassion teacher that also has trainings as a graduate from other people in adjacent fields.
Wonderful. And you're also an author. You have 2 books out, as I think. The latest one is Snap. And then you also have Life Falls Apart, but You Don't Have to. I love the title of that book. And again, I thought your message, it was especially important to those of us with ADHD who do have that negative self-talk. And I always like to ask my guests, usually I'll say, are you a grandmother? Which Julie is a new grandmother. But also Julie, although she doesn't have ADHD, all 3 of her children and her spouse has it. So she definitely is an expert to interweave ADHD and mindfulness. So Julie, I don't want to butcher anymore. I invited you here to hear what you have to say, not to hear myself talk. So please take the stage or the microphone.
So being the spouse of somebody with ADHD, and by the way, in the 60s, when my husband was diagnosed, it was called ADD, and they called him hyperkinetic.
Mm-hmm.
And he would just take things apart. He would take apart household appliances. He would take apart his parents' friends' watches. And this was before he knew how to put stuff back together. and he was in elementary school, and he wasn't learning how to read. He couldn't read.
Mm-hmm.
And so his parents got him tested, and they said he had ADD, and they said they could work with him. And it was this groovy school, over the course of 7 years, they could maybe make these improvements, or there's this new medicine called Ritalin that they could try. And his parents said, let's try the medicine instead of 7 years of God knows what. And he started taking Ritalin, and he learned how to read in just a matter of weeks.
Wow.
And then he jumped many, many grades. So he really needed that drug.
Sure.
Now, fast forward however many years, I've got a little boy, and I don't think that he's going to have ADHD or ADD because he's so focused. See, this was my naivete, right?
Yes, because that's why I didn't think I had it.
It's ADHD and attentive. He was so focused, pointing with his little finger and making me reread it over and over and over again. A fire truck, a steam shovel excavator, or whatever it was. And then in kindergarten, I had him evaluated for ADD, and he was like a scatter, but off the charts ADHD. But I didn't actually believe it. And then in third grade, he had to get pulled out for math. And I think it was third grade. His teacher said to me the grade before, things are going to start ramping up. You should have him tested for his inattention. I love the kid. He always has his hand up. He's participating in class, but you should have him tested. So I'm like, So I had him tested, and it was the same exact result as from when he was 5 years old. And then I put him on medicine, and the lady that was the math specialist called me. She said, oh my God, I just had the most unbelievable session with your son. And he shared with me that he went on, I think it was Concerta or whatever it was in those days. And I asked him when he started, and he said this morning, could that be true? And I said, yes. And she said, wow. So, I mean, these things. And then I had a set of twins, and they had ADHD also. So I'm basically the executive assistant for the whole family. I'm the one that could actually see a squirrel and then go back to what I was doing.
Wow. So that's interesting because in my family, 2 of my 3 children have ADHD. I have ADHD, and one of my children has OCD, and she is exactly what you are. She is the one that would organize and clean the house and get it. Sadly, she's in college now, but so she has the role that you have. And I love when you share the backstory because, especially women, and why I named it Grandma Has ADHD, is that we tended to see the hyperactivity more in the boys because to your point, that's what we expected to see. We didn't think of inattention as an ADHD trait. And so actually, when my ex-husband accused me of having ADHD, I said, no, that was my half brother who was put on Ritalin because he was so impulsive. He couldn't even stand at a stoplight. That's not me.
Yeah.
So here we are, fast forward. It's been 10 years almost since my diagnosis through my adult child now, who was in middle school. And then, the realization that my mom has ADHD, which, right. And then, I work with seniors in their homes, and we do move management, home organizing. And I was seeing all of these seniors with clutter. And in the beginning, I would say, oh, don't worry about it. This looks like my mom's house. And I thought that it was hoarding disorder because there was piles of stuff everywhere. And then the more that I learned about ADHD, the more I realized actually hoarding disorder and ADHD and the stuff behind it, the reason behind the clutter is actually a very different reason behind the clutter. And it's not my episode, but, my mom, it turns out, does not have hoarding disorder. She just has ADHD and is now has been diagnosed. But again, why I wanted to bring you on, I was sharing with you before the podcast, I've been listening to the book Small Talk by Roxanne. Have you heard of this book before? Okay. So it was written by Roxanne and Daniel Pink. She has ADHD. He does not. They started the book originally to be a book about tips that you could use to kind of help yourself with your ADHD. And then she realized how significant that voice in our head is and how nasty she's been to herself her whole life. Stupid, lazy. Why can't you do this? Why can't you get it together? And that is the number one problem I think that exists for people with ADHD is that we are horrible to ourselves. We talk to ourselves in a way that we would never talk to another person. And I think that your message needs to be heard by our audience. And now I am really going to be quiet.
Okay. So mindful self-compassion is really about self-kindness. It's treating yourself like you would treat a dear friend. Now, there is 24 unit hours of how do you get there? Mm-hmm. But the executive summary is mindful self-compassion is built on 3 pillars. Mindfulness, because you have to know that you're suffering to be nice to yourself. Self-kindness, and common humanity. And the common humanity piece is kind of fascinating because there's 8 billion of us. And so if you're feeling a specific emotion, you can be sure that 1 billion or 2 people are feeling exactly the same way at exactly the same moment. And that helps you feel more connected to other humans, less alone, less isolated, less likely to fall into depression.
Okay.
So some of the stuff that you talked about was your inner critic, and that's internal family systems work. It was spearheaded by Dr. Schwartz, and he has an institute for it, and he trains clinicians for it. And some people call it PARTS work. Some people call it IFS, internal family systems. In the mindful self-compassion curriculum, we just call it the inner critic.
Okay.
And we have exercises on how to figure out who that voice is, figure out what that voice is trying to do, because unless you had a completely abusive or neglectful parent, the voice is usually trying to keep you safe, having you do your best, whatever, but it's not skillful. And it's something that we have internalized from an early childhood caregiver, right? So you figure out who that voice is, you figure out what they're trying to say, then you find your compassionate voice. And if you don't know what that is, you imagine what you would say to somebody you really cared about, like your best friend, about a specific issue, and you turn that around and you talk to yourself that way. And you're like, wow, that's really motivating. That's really sweet. That's really wonderful. That is my compassionate voice. So you tap into your compassionate voice, and then you basically write a resignation letter for your inner critic. You know, I thank you. You were trying to keep me safe all these years. You're not helpful. You're not skillful. You make me feel bad. Take a hike.
You're fired. You're fired.
You're fired. I've got this.
Right. So,
and the SNAP piece of all of this, which is the second book, which is the acronym for how we learn to manage our nervous system when anything is awry. Whether it's your inner critic or not your inner critic, whether you're feeling grief or sadness or fear or anxiety or whatever it is, SNAP is soothing touch, because you want oxytocin and endorphins to come down and help you. And they will, from your brain. It's the mammalian caregiver response. So S is soothing touch. N is name the emotion. Name it to tame it, Jami. Feel it to heal it. Right? And you're giving your prefrontal cortex time to come online, whether you've got ADD, ADHD or not, whether you're a neurotypical brain, you want your prefrontal cortex to come online so that you can make a more skillful response. So soothing touch takes a couple seconds. Naming it takes a couple seconds. Pretty soon, 12 seconds in or so, your prefrontal cortex is online, which is good. And then the A of SNAP is, what do I need to hear right now? And you say it to yourself.
So it's an affirmation.
You say, well, depending what the fear is, right? So like if it's fear, you could say, wow, I'm actually safe right now. Fear was what was arising, because I have a mindfulness practice, so I know what it was and what I could name, right? It was fear, or it was anxiety, or it was whatever. And you say to yourself, Julie, sweetheart, or Jami, sweetheart, you're okay right now. You're actually on a StreamYard platform talking to a nice lady. You're not in any danger. It's going to be okay. And then the second piece of A in SNAP is, what do I need to do right now to shift my mood? And that is your toolbox, Jami. So I don't know if you took the workshop from me at the Women's Weekend where I had everybody write their joy list. So that's your joy list. So what do I need to do or want to do to shift my mood right now, to change my channel in my mind? And it could be whatever you could do in that moment, whether it's calling a friend, going outside, doing a meditation, cooking, binge watching a show, exercising, doing breath work, planning a vacation, whatever it is, that's what you're doing until you feel better from the thing that you felt bad about. And then the P is praise. And that could be thanking yourself, your teachers, your practice. It could be thanking your deity, Jesus, God, Allah, whomever. And it folds you into the gratitude practice, which has, a gazillion mental health and well-being benefits, as you know.
Right. Well, okay. One thing I need to know what the A is, because I got the soothing touch. I'm sorry?
Act.
Okay. I needed that. That was
what
missing.
What do I need to hear and what do I need to do?
Okay.
Is both under A. And that's really your toolbox, but you want to get your brain online so that you can even ask yourself those questions, so that you're not like, whoa.
I'm going to throw a curveball at you. I'm going to throw the question to you, and then we're going to pause and we're going to come back and answer it. Okay. So people with ADHD, we tend to have received more negative messages from other people than the neurotypical person will have. And so we tend to internalize that, because that is the message that we heard. And I remember even as a child, constantly being in trouble. And then you come into the world with thinking I'm a bad person. Why can't, so I want to make sure that we really gear this conversation and how we can apply that to that specific audience who maybe has heard so much negative, not just from themselves, but, from the world. So we're going to pause. And then Julie, I want you to answer that question. Ever wondered why helping a loved one declutter feels like speaking different languages? I did, especially with my mom. It wasn't until I founded Silver Linings Transitions, helping San Diego seniors organize and move for over a decade, that I discovered why. We all experience clutter differently, and for those of us with ADHD, it's a whole other world. If you are listening in the San Diego area and feeling stuck with moving, paperwork, photos, or home organization, our team at Silver Linings Transitions gets it. We understand ADHD's unique challenges, and we won't just help you get organized. We'll create sustainable systems that finally stick. Schedule a consultation with our team today at 760-522-1624. That's 760-522-1624, or find us at silverliningstransitions.com. We are back with Julie Potiker, the author of Snap. We just discussed, what you do when you have that inner critic or those bad feelings. And she shared the theory behind her book, Snap. And then I left you, Julie, with the question, for those of us with ADHD who maybe have heard more negative messages than the average person, how can you help us?
I think you just have to be gentle with yourself. You have to know that you're worthy. You have to know that you're creative. ADHD people are some of the most out-of-the-box creative thinkers that I've ever met. And you just have to comfort. You see, I put my hands on my heart. You just have to comfort yourself when you hear negative comments and counter them in your own mind with all the positive beauty and wonder that you are.
I have a theory that we are all, we all were created to take on a role in life. And there was actually a rabbi that I heard say this, and I loved it. He said that we all are different religions, just like there are different instruments to an orchestra, that if we all played the same, instrument, the music would not sound the way that it does. And I believe that people with ADHD do have special gifts, and we are here for some reason, just like there are people who need to come up with the ideas, the visionaries. And there are people who need to carry out the plan. So to that point, I feel very strongly that we need to embrace what our role is and really, lean into that rather than feeling embarrassed. So what are some other things that you can share with our listeners? And even if it's advice, on what ADHD looks like in your family, because again, or, what you can say to loved ones who have family members with ADHD.
Well, when Michael was little, I had all these tricks. I would set a timer for 5 minutes or 7 minutes or 10 minutes, depending on how old he was, when he would do his homework in the afternoon. And so he would do a specific amount of moments of homework, and then we would stand up and we would run around the table, or he would play on like a fake musical instrument, or we would do something just a little bit bonkers for a minute or two, and then we would sit back down.
So the Pomodoro method, way back then, before you knew what it was.
Oh, I don't know. I still don't know what it is. Is that a thing? What I made up? Is that actually a thing?
Yeah, it is. It's called the Pomodoro method. It's usually 15, 20 minutes, whatever, that you make yourself sit down and do a task that you don't want to do. You get rid of the interruptions, and then you reward yourself when the timer goes off.
Oh my
and
God.
So, yes, so you did that.
I did that. And then with the girls and with Michael, we really leaned heavily on white and those dry erase markers and just chunking down all their tasks. So the thing didn't look so overwhelming, because if it looks overwhelming, I couldn't get them to do it.
You were an ADHD coach ahead of your time. I mean, you didn't even know that that's what you were doing, but we didn't.
No.
We didn't.
We all survived it. They're 30, 30, and 34. And actually, Michael and Annie, who just made me a grandmother 2.5 weeks ago, they are both ADHD, the mom and the dad.
Oh.
So I'm pretty sure that little baby is going to be neurodivergent, and they're going to have, probably from 3rd or 4th grade through 12th grade, the same kind of hassles and pain in the butt that I had as a mom.
But you'll be able to advise them. I mean, the role of grandmother is, my daughter took a class, I don't know if it's a sociology or an anthropology class, but the role of women as we age and how significant the role of grandmother is, both for the woman and for the child, that, that evolutionarily we should be done, once we've reproduced and we can't do it anymore. But we are here to be grandparents if we have children.
I'll be the wise elder.
Right, exactly. So they are
elders saying, really? Because my daughter Kara, she wrote 2 novels in middle school and published them herself, and they got delivered to the house. She didn't even tell me or ask me. The girls are musicians. Michael, I mean, he's so out of the box the way he thinks. It's like my husband. And I always thought that if I was on a deserted island, I would want my husband, because I call him MacGyver.
My gosh. I use that term all the time.
Oh, really?
Yes. Because we can come up with things. We are just so in the moment, especially if things are heightened, our brains just rise to the occasion and we have all these creative solutions. Right. Yeah. I use MacGyver all the time. We're so in line. I didn't even know this. You know what?
When we got married, it was in 1988, and we were both Jewish. So we had a Jewish wedding. So we were under the chuppah with the rabbi in Cleveland, Ohio. And the rabbi said at one point, "And what will hold this marriage together?" And I looked up at my husband and I said, "Duct tape." Because it's kind of like MacGyver. If you've got duct tape, you got some paper clips, you have you can figure out whatever it is.
Right. Okay. So, all right. So let's take this conversation in a little bit different level. People who are listening who don't have ADHD, what would your advice be to them for how to cope, but also how to make peace in the home? And I want to share one thing with you too, really quickly. When I was at the International ADHD Conference, there were some people with ADHD who had their non-ADHD partner with them. And I learned that they were called the saint in the relationship.
No, the thing that I would say is I just had to always have curiosity, non-judgment, and compassion. And this was before I was a mindful self-compassion teacher, because the backpack of a kid with ADHD is so ridiculously disorganized, or can be, and was in our case. And sometimes the homework actually was done, but it was just crunched up underneath the folders at the bottom of the backpack, and you'd have to dump it all out. And their bedrooms, oh my God. And I would try all these, reward things with stars and this and that. I tried everything, and pretty much for the mess and the clutter, I think everything failed. And I just had to love myself that I tried and not blame them because it's actually not willful.
Wow. You are so spot on. It's amazing that you've cobbled it together without knowing all of these tools. So that's pretty amazing. And then how did you become a mindfulness coach? Like, was it all of the chaos in your family?
Yes. So when the girls were in middle school, I don't know how to say this without throwing them under a bus, but if you read Life Falls Apart, but You Don't Have to, Mindful Methods for Staying Calm in the Midst of Chaos, which is my first book, it's a mindfulness memoir. So it's stories and then the how-to, stories and then the how-to. And I do talk about them in the book a lot, and also Michael a lot. I got permission from them to do it. I was so stressed out because when they were going through puberty, their behavior was really bad. And my parents were here, and I was the only kid with boots on the ground. My sisters don't live here, and my parents were aging, and I had these out of control kids, and I just wasn't keeping it together. And I started having garbled speech. And so I went to a neurologist, and he did all the correct scans. And in the interview process, he learned what my day-to-day life was like. And then he said, what's going on in your brain is actually you have too much stress.
Wow.
So
I've never heard of that stress response.
Yeah. So he recommended mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is pretty cool for a neurologist to recommend. And as it turned out, he and his wife both taught it, but I didn't take it from them because I lived in La Jolla and they were up in Encinitas. I took it at UCSD Center for Mindfulness, but it's taught all over the world. It's John Kabat-Zinn's curriculum from 1979. People, if they're listening to this and they're curious about it, it's MBSR, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. So that's what got me on the journey of mindfulness. And then more and more other classes, either I found them or they were created. Like Mindful Self-Compassion wasn't created till 2010. So I took it when it was created. And then they offered a teacher training for it in 2014, and I applied and got accepted.
Wow. So really it was ADHD that sort of led you to your path.
Well, I don't know if they would have been better behaved if
No, I'm not suggesting that.
Okay, so who knows looking back?
Right.
Who knows looking back? But all I can say is I was not equipped as a mom for the level of chaos. 3 teenagers with ADHD in Southern California with all the drugs and sex and rock and roll. I was not equipped, and my nervous system was not equipped.
Sure. Well, I will tell you that as a mom with ADHD, and I did not know that I had it when I had 3 young children in the house. A mother typically is the executive functioning of the household. And so if you can't get it together, even if you're not under stress, it's really, really difficult. So, your children are very lucky that you were able to, cobble the things together that you needed to, and then get the help that you needed to get when you needed it, and, that you were pointed in the right direction. But I love mindfulness. I try really hard. I have anxiety, as many people with ADHD, they seem to occur together. And that is me thinking too much about what's coming versus being in the moment that I'm in. I'm okay in this moment, right? I don't need to worry about what's coming.
Right.
So
don't write any emotional checks until they are due. And I like thinking about it like, don't time travel. Don't time travel to the past, and don't time travel to the future. So we're wired to worry and ruminate because we're primates. So the worry is about the future. The ruminating is about the past. That's how our brains are wired. It's not our fault.
So
to counter that, to counter that is constantly bringing yourself back to the present.
Mm-hmm. The one exercise that I learned was the orange, of holding the orange, then smelling the orange, and then peeling the orange, and then tasting the orange. That's probably very rudimentary, basic mindfulness, but
It's all good. I do it
right,
with my
right.
morning coffee. My first sip of coffee in the morning is a mindful moment.
I
It's
love
not
it.
the whole mug,
Uh-huh.
but it's the first sip. It's just part of my practice. I do it with brushing my teeth too. I close my eyes. I have an electric toothbrush. So I'm like tasting the toothpaste. I'm listening to
Oh, wow.
I'm feeling the brush on my teeth. I don't do it for a whole 2 minutes. I used to. I do it for probably a minute. So all those
Mm-hmm.
times during the day
Mm-hmm.
when I'm cooking and I'm cutting vegetables, I bring myself into what I'm actually doing when I'm doing it. And
Mm-hmm.
all that equals brain health.
That's awesome. So one of the things that I learned in my certified senior advisor, I just took the certification is brain health, neuroplasticity. That was my ADHD brain going off. Is that it doesn't matter how old you are, you always have the ability to learn new things.
Right.
So
And not only that, Jami, when you take in a positive mental state by recognizing that you're having one or creating one from pulling up a memory of something that was awesome, and you enrich it and absorb it, like you relive it, you're creating another neural bridge, because what wires together. And the more happy bridges that you build in your brain, the negative ones get pruned out. That's how you can end up with a default mode network, which is just your wandering mind, that's kind of happy. A lot of people's default mode networks are kind of bad neighborhoods. Mine's a happy one because I take in this practice of taking in the good maybe a dozen or more times a day over the past 15 years.
Right. In ADHD coaching, we call it the rainbow list or the magnificent me moment. So it is, think of a time when when we have ADHD, a lot of times we have a moment that happens and we don't even stop to pause to absorb how that moment feels. We just, move on to the next thing or dismiss it. I've heard of people who have to literally go back and look at their LinkedIn to see what it is that they've even done because we just are so moving from thing to thing to thing. So
that doesn't help your brain.
Absolutely not.
Because it's like think of your brain like a colander, that you put pasta in and the water goes through. You want to be able to grab each time something's good, and it doesn't take long. It's like a handful of seconds to make a new neural pathway that's happy.
Yeah, you're right. It's just, we've got to be really present in the moments that we're in. So how can our listeners find you if they, either want to read your book or they want to work with you?
My website's a library. Just go to my website. The podcast is on there, which is Guided Meditations with a Poem, which is free. All my teachers' books, my 2 books, 15 years of blogs.
Wow. And what is your website?
Probably 400 or 500 interviews. It's called Mindful Methods for Life. So Mindful Methods with an S, FOR, life.com.
Okay. Wow. You are really a wealth of information and really going to be a wonderful resource for our ADHD community. I always like to ask people if you have any advice as parting words, because my tagline is, making the rest of your life the best of your life, sort of like when you know better, you do better. What would be your final words in that conversation?
Be gentle with yourself.
Okay.
And you'll be gentle with others.
I love it. Thank you so much, Julie, for agreeing to be on the podcast. If you are listening, I would love it if you would like, subscribe, and share. Grandma Has ADHD. And we are building a Facebook community because one of the things that we've learned is that we thrive when we are together as community. And when you meet the other amazing people who have ADHD, you will feel better about being a member of that club. So thanks so much for listening. Thank you, Julie.
Thanks, Jami.
The opinions expressed on Grandma Has ADHD podcast are those of our guests and hosts and are intended for informational and entertainment purposes only. This podcast does not provide medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The content discussed in this episode is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, mental health professional, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or mental health concern. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or emergency services immediately. The host, guests, and producers of Grandma Has ADHD do not assume any liability for the content of this podcast. Listen at your own discretion.